Hello Death Summoners, welcome to Gamertopia. Today I have by far the best endgame and Gauntlet build for the Necromancer that I've been able to come up with by far. I tried a bunch of different builds for Necromancer, and while most of them are based around the Bone Spear, I was happy to find that the one that works best doesn't use it. Before we check out the build, if you aren't already subscribed to my channel, make sure you do. It'll keep you up to date with all my future Diablo videos, and with Season 4 right around the corner, you can be sure to expect a bunch of new content coming up. Alright, let's check out the build. Starting off with our basic skill tree, we'll use 2 points in any of the basic attack tree. We'll be gaining our essence from some select nodes on our Paragon board, passive skills, our gear, and our construct, so we won't need a basic attack for this build. Our core skill tree is opened up now, and we'll start by taking 1 rank of Unliving Energy to give us 3 extra essence and to open up Imperfectly Imbalanced, which we will max out with 3 ranks. This passive gives us 15% increased damage with core skills at the cost of 9% more essence. We'll have a lot of essence generation with this build, so that won't be a problem. We'll max out Blood Surge next with 5 ranks, and this will be our main damage source in the build. We'll use the Enhanced and Paranormal Blood Surge modifiers with it as well. Blood Surge is a crazy strong core skill when it comes to clearing out groups of enemies. When you use this on a group of enemies, it starts by doing a small amount of damage by drawing the blood of your surrounding enemies, then it explodes for a large amount of damage. The surge of damage can be increased by 5% up to 50% for each enemy you hit with the initial blood draw as well. Enhanced Blood Surge will heal you by up to 5.5% of your health whenever you use the skill, and Paranormal Blood Surge will give you a guaranteed overpower with Blood Surge after hitting enemies with it 5 times while healthy. We're going to be using a lot of overpower damage with this build, so this is going to be a very important modifier for this skill. Before moving on to the next tree, we'll also max out Hewed Flesh to increase the chance of creating corpses. We'll have a couple skills that will make use of corpses, so this is going to be very helpful. In our next tree, we'll just be using 2 passives, Grim Harvest and Fueled by Death. We'll put 2 ranks into Grim Harvest to give us some essence generation when we consume a corpse, and then we'll max out Fueled by Death. This will give us a 9% increase in damage output for 6 seconds whenever we consume a corpse. Now we'll head down to the Curse tree and we'll max out these 3 passive skills, Death's Embrace, Amplify Damage, and Death's Approach. Death's Embrace gives us 6% damage increase to close enemies while decreasing the damage from close enemies by 12%. With Blood Surge being our main damage output, we'll need to be close to our enemies, so this will give us a nice little boost for this skill while helping us with our survivability. Amplify Damage will give us 12% increase to damage to curse enemies, and Death's Approach will give us 12% increase to our movement speed. Death's Approach is a new passive as of patch 1.3.3, and it replaced Death's Reach, so if this sounds unfamiliar to you, that would be why. This passive can also be moved to somewhere more useful to you if you don't plan on doing the Gauntlet at all. Movement speed is very important for the Gauntlet, but not as much for other endgame content, so use the points where you find them useful. Now we'll take 1 rank of Decrepify so that we can apply a curse to our enemies, and we'll also use the Enhanced and Abhorrent Decrepify modifiers. With Decrepify, our enemies will be slowed and do 20% less damage to us. Enhanced Decrepify will give those enemies a chance to be stunned, and then Abhorrent Decrepify will give us a 15% lucky hit chance to reduce our cooldowns by 1 second whenever we hit a cursed enemy. All we have left now are a few more passives and our ultimate skill. In our next skill tree, we'll make use of these 4 blood passives, which will all be maxed out with 3 ranks. The first one we have is Gruesome Mending, which gives us a 30% increase in healing from all sources. With Blood Surge giving us back some health from our enemies, this will give us a nice boost to our survivability. Coalesce Blood will give our blood skills an 18% increase in damage while we are healthy, but we'll also be using some gear to boost this to 6 ranks, which will end up bringing this up to 36%. Tides of Blood will give us 15% increase in overpower damage from our blood skills, and this will increase to 30% while we are healthy. And lastly, Drained Vitality will give us a lucky hit chance of 30% to fortify us for 8% of our health when hitting an enemy with a blood skill. Now for our ultimate skill tree, we'll max out the Inspiring Leader, Standalone, and Memento Mori passives. Inspiring Leader gives us 12% attack speed increase when we are healthy for at least 2 seconds. Standalone will give us an 18% damage reduction since we aren't going to be using any minions with this build, and Memento Mori increases our sacrifice bonuses from skeletal warriors and mages by 60%. For our ultimate skill, we'll use Bone Storm with Prime and Supreme Bone Storm. We won't be using this skill as a huge source of damage in itself, but with its 2 modifiers, it'll give us a nice 15% damage reduction increase and a huge 20% critical strike chance increase while Bone Storm is active. So while Bone Storm won't be doing a ton of damage for us, the damage output from our Blood Surge will be greatly increased through the critical strikes. Lastly, for our key passive, we'll use Rathima's Vigor. Rathima's Vigor will give us a guaranteed overpower for our Blood Surge every 12 seconds while we are healthy. In our Book of the Dead, we'll be sacrificing all of our minions. We'll sacrifice our Skirmishers, giving us a 5% increased critical strike chance, our Bone Mages for a 25% increase to our overpower damage, and our Iron Golem for a 30% increase in our critical strike damage. Now you might be thinking at this point we're missing some skills, but I'll get back to how we'll fill those in when we get to the gear. Before that, let's check out our Paragon board. For our starter board, we'll make use of a lot of the rare and magic nodes that increase our damage output, and we'll use the Sacrificial Glyph, which is going to increase our damage output even more and give us some extra armor. This glyph also gives us 10% increase to our damage output since we aren't using any minions. We'll attach the Bloodbath board next, where we'll get quite a bit of increased overpower damage, damage while healthy, and damage while fortified via the rare, magic, and legendary nodes. We'll also use the Essence glyph here as well to get a nice boost to our critical strike damage. Through the additional bonus on this glyph, we will also get 22% increase in critical strike damage to enemies who are not healthy. And this is different than enemies who are injured, since being healthy is considered anything from 80 to 100% health. We'll do increased critical strike damage to any enemy who is below 80% health. Next, we'll attach the Flesh Eater board, where we'll get some extra critical strike damage and damage to injured enemies. We'll also get a 40% increase to our damage output every time we consume 5 corpses with the Flesh Eater legendary node. For the glyph on this board, we'll use Exploit, which gives us increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and will also increase our damage output by up to 10% for attacking vulnerable enemies. The Scent of Death board will be attached next, and we'll get quite a bit more critical strike damage, damage to injured enemies, and damage to healthy enemies from our rare and magic nodes on this board. We'll also make use of the Scent of Death legendary node, which will give us a 15% damage reduction whenever there are 2 or more corpses nearby, and if there are less than 2 corpses, we'll get 15% increased damage output. This will provide us with a nice boost in damage for starting most of our attacks until we get at least a couple enemies killed. The glyph on this board will be the Dominate glyph, which will be powering up as much as possible since this glyph increases our overpower damage. The additional bonus from this glyph also has us do 12% increased damage to an enemy for 5 seconds whenever we hit them with an overpowered attack. For the most part, we'll be one-shotting everything with Blood Surge, but this will help us melt down bosses and some of the stronger elites we come across. We'll attach the Bone Graft board to the right, which we'll mostly be using for the glyph socket, where we'll use the Corporeal glyph. This boosts the willpower and elemental resistance magic nodes that are within range of this glyph, but we're mostly using it for the additional bonus. This bonus gives us a 10% increase to our physical damage output. While this might seem confusing, our Blood Surge skill does use physical damage, so we'll be able to make use of this. For the next board, we'll be attaching it to the top of the Scent of Death board, and this will be the Blood Begets Blood board. For this one, we'll get just a few points in, and we'll use it for increased overpower damage and overall damage via these magic nodes and rare node. Lastly, we'll attach the Wither board to the top of the Bone Graft board, where we'll get a 10% boost to our shadow damage, and we'll attach the Amplify glyph to the glyph socket. This glyph will give us a little extra willpower from the one magic node we took, but we'll be getting a greater benefit from the additional bonus, which has us do 10% increased damage to cursed enemies. Alright, now let's check out what gear we'll be using to really make this build start coming together. The most important piece of gear for this build is going to be our helmet, Harlequin Crest. As much as I wish there was a way around it, almost all the best endgame builds use this item, and it is super important for this build to work properly. While it gives us a nice 20% damage reduction, the +4 to all skills allows us to use some skills without spending points in our skill tree. This is how we'll be able to use the Blight, Corpse Explosion, and Corpse Tendril skills in the build. For our chests, we'll use Intelligence, Damage percentage, blood skill damage, total armor percentage, and aspect of disobedience, just to give us some more survivability. The gloves will have attack speed, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, ranks of blood surge, and blood bathed aspect. With the best roll of this aspect, your blood surge will cast a second time at no essence cost and only doing 10% less damage than the first. This ends up almost doubling the damage output of your blood surge skill, so this aspect is very important. The pants will be Tybalt's Will, which is going to give us a nice increase in damage output and damage reduction, but the main reason to use this piece of gear is for the massive 40% increase in damage and to give us 50 of our essence when we become unstoppable. And our boots are what are going to make Tybalt's Will extra useful. The boots will have movement speed, shrine buff duration, essence cost reduction, ranks of corpse tendrils, and aspect of metamorphosis. With aspect of metamorphosis, you'll become unstoppable whenever you use evade, which will proc the damage and essence increase from Tybalt's Will. You'll want to use boots that have attack reducing evades cooldown or the extra charges of evade for this to work effectively. For the weapon, we'll use the Grandfather with the all stats boost, 84% increase in damage output, and then 152.5% increase to critical strike damage. We can't pass this up. If you don't have this weapon, you'll want to use a sword and focus, and you'll want to try to use all stats, intelligence, critical strike damage, overpower damage, essence cost reduction, and cooldown reduction. Then you'll have to move some aspects around from this build, but I'd try to include aspect of Grasping Veins and Ghostwalker's aspect. For the amulet, we'll use movement speed, damage percentage for 4 seconds after killing an elite, shrine buff duration, ranks of Coalesced Blood, and aspect of Rathmas Chosen. This aspect will give us a huge 75% increase to our attack speed, and this is almost overkill, so if you don't have the max roll of this aspect, it's okay. I'll also mention that the increased damage after killing an elite can be swapped out with essence cost reduction, and this could likely be more beneficial to us. The first ring we're going to use is going to be Ring of the Sacrilegious Soul, which will increase our ranks of all corpse skills by 3 and also automatically cast Corpse Explosion every second and Corpse Tendrils every 8 seconds. This will be great for some extra and automated damage output. The second ring will be the Ring of Starless Skies. This ring has made a really big difference in this build for me. It'll give us a large boost to our critical strike chance, critical strike damage, core skill damage, and lucky hit chance, but it's the unique aspect that really makes it bring this build to the next level. This ring will decrease essence cost and increase damage output by 10% and up to 40% for 3 seconds just by using a skill that costs essence. You don't even need to hit an enemy with it, and it's still going to increase damage and decrease essence. One last thing about the gear, if you aren't going to be running the Gauntlet much, you can swap out the shrine buff duration stats for something that you'll find more useful. Try to go for critical strike damage, overpower damage, and cooldown reduction. Alright, let's check out the last part of this build, the construct. For the first governing stone, we'll use Flash of Adrenaline with Genesis, tactical support, and duration support. With the 3 of these tuning stones, Flash of Adrenaline gives us a consistent 50% increase in our damage output since the skill cooldown and duration will be at 12 seconds. The second governing stone will be Tempest, and we'll use Evernight, resource support, and breaking support. Tempest will do a little extra damage for us, and with it attacking every 1 second, we'll get the Evernight benefit of +4 to all skills as a constant effect since it lasts for 2 seconds. We'll also get 20 essence every 1 second through resource support. Then we'll also have breaking support, which will be making our enemies vulnerable and also break through any barriers that our enemies may have. Playing this build is super easy, but let's break it down. The first thing you'll do is cast your Decrepify skill on a group of enemies. This is immediately going to have them be slowed, do less damage to you, and possibly be stunned. If you have skills on cooldown, this will also give the possibility of a lucky hit chance to reduce your cooldowns. Next, you'll cast Blight on an enemy to start doing some shadow damage over time. Use your evade towards the group of enemies to proc Tybalt's Will. Start spamming Blood Surge, and if you have corpses nearby, you can alternate through Blood Surge and Corpse Explosion. If you have a tough group of elites or a boss, cast Bone Storm for the damage reduction and increase critical strike chance. Repeat steps 3 and 4 till your enemies are dead. Your Ring of Sacrilegious Soul will also be casting Corpse Tendrils and Corpse Explosion automatically, but you can use these manually to precisely place these attacks when needed. Hope this helps you with your endgame content and getting on the Gauntlet leaderboard for Season 3. Definitely let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a full build link for this, and I'll make sure to add one to the description.